Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, breaking out the live stream on a rainy northeastern Saturday afternoon in May. So we're going to look ahead to talk some college football, and we're going to look not only ahead to 2018, we're going to look way ahead off into the distance. We have started a series looking at future schedules in college football. Took a look at the SEC, the ACC. Now we're going to check out the Big Ten. I've got the live chat open, so please give me your suggestions for future series, content ideas, any ideas that you have for Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, and of course, your comments and questions. So I'm getting the conversation started with future schedules in the Big Ten, but whatever you have in the world of college football, we will discuss. If you enjoy the audio instead, you go to Google Play, Podbean, iTunes, and Stitcher, and you search Mark Rogers TV. All right, so typically with the other conferences, what I've done is take one of the best teams in the league, let's say Alabama or Clemson, and start there because everyone wants to dive into the heavyweights. And then I go through the rest of the division, typically in descending order. But in the Big Ten, I am going straight to Iowa to pick on the Hawkeyes and this rubbish of a schedule coming up in future years. So if you're a Hawkeye fan, I've said it before, you must be bored to death, bored to tears, looking ahead at your team's schedules because you know what they are. So, of course, in the Big Ten, we've got 9 conference games. The league went to 9 conference games 2 years ago and now play 3 9-conference games. So if you're Iowa, your Power 5 games right there on the books each and every year against Iowa State. I love the rivalry, Iowa State, but I believe the Hawkeyes need to do something in addition to playing the Cyclones every year in the Power 5. So what Iowa typically does, what they always do is schedule a couple of group of 5s or a group of 5 and an FCS to match up the rest of their schedule against that number 1 game in the Power 5 against Iowa State. So Iowa's schedule, we know what it is, and Hawkeye fans have nothing to look forward to. There have been no big contracts signed for the Hawkeyes. In 2018, they barely venture outside the state. They play Iowa State, Northern Iowa, and Northern Illinois. In 2019, it's Iowa State, Miami of Ohio, Middle Tennessee. In 2020, it's Iowa State, Northern Iowa, Northern Illinois. That looks familiar. That looks like 2018. 2018 and 2020 are exactly the same schedule, non-conference. 2021 at Iowa State and Colorado State. So there's an opportunity for Iowa in 2021 to say, we're sick of the Colin Cowherds out there demeaning our program, telling us that we're inferior, that we don't play anyone, and at least schedule somebody, if they possibly can. Most teams are fully scheduled throughout 2021, but we did look at the SEC in particular and saw where there are a number of teams with just 3 and not 4 non-conference games scheduled for 2021. So there's an opportunity, Iowa, for you to do something really good and gain some credibility and schedule somebody in the Power 5 in 2021. You've got Iowa State and Colorado State, and then you've got Iowa State scheduled in 2022 and 23 and nobody else. So starting in 2021, Iowa State or Iowa, hear me out, gain some credibility, gain some traction, make a mark on the college football map. There's been a few seasons in recent past where Iowa, in addition to the Iowa State game, scheduled Pitt home and home and picked up a couple wins there against a decent Power 5 middle tier ACC program. All right, Iowa. There you go. That's what you need to do. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, striking up the live stream on a Saturday afternoon. And if anybody would like to delve into the calendar and count them up, how many weeks to college football? I think we're right around the 85 to 90 day mark, which would mean about 12 weeks to college football, maybe 12 or 13 weeks. to college football. All right. Checking out the live stream and the live stream chat here. Let's see if we have anybody on the line. All right. Already folks chiming in on this one. Okay. Dondre, go Clemson. Dondre, go Tigers. That would be the Auburn Tigers, of course. Navy Thomas, he's up and at 'em, ready to go. NCIS Fanatic 21. Yes, we will look at the Buckeyes. Sunshine and 65 degrees where I live. That was yesterday for us. It was sunny and 75, and I enjoyed the day and the evening down in Hoboken, New Jersey, and those fine people down there in the neighborhood of the Cake Boss. Navy Thomas, let's rank the new coaches like CBS Sports did. Let's do that. Navy Thomas, get that suggestion down on paper so I don't lose track of that one. Ranking the new coaches, maybe ranking the coaches, period. New coaches, because most of the coaches, aside from, let's say, Joe Moorhead at Mississippi State, most of them are coaches with experience at the Power 5 level. Kevin Sumlin, Jimbo Fisher, and on and on and on and on. So we've got a few new coaches completely to the Power 5 level. Scott Frost, if you want to count not playing in the Power 5, technically not a Power 5 coach last season, although his team and his program certainly played at that level. All right, ranking coaches, ranking Power 5 coaches, ranking group of ranking coaches. Just throw it down there, ranking coaches. So I did that in a number of conferences a couple years ago, ranked the coaches in the major conferences, and also ranked the coaches 10 all the way up to 1, my top 10 coaches, which would be a bit amusing to watch now because this was about close to 10 years ago. So Bob Stoops was coaching and Jim Tressel and Pete Carroll at that point. All right, I got it down, Navy Thomas. Rank the coaches like CBS Sports did. So I will not check out CBS Sports because I don't want to be swayed by their ratings. Let's talk about the most important team in the Big Ten future schedule first. Again, I just had to jump on Iowa. Poor Iowa. And Hawkeye fans, understand me here. I've got no vendettas against the program. I enjoy Iowa football. I enjoy the Big Ten West probably more so than any other commentator you're going to find out there, because most commentators say, I sleep on the Big Ten West. People down it, diss it for being mundane and workmanlike and not real flashy, not real glitzy. But I love the Minnesota-Purdue games, and I love the Iowa-Nebraska games on that Friday following Thanksgiving. I love the division, and of course, Wisconsin is the class right now. But Iowa, schedule somebody. And I know I'm going to hear that Iowa State's better, but how long will they be better? And they were better for one season, and they were better, not great. They were better, 7-5 better. All right, Dondre, the Big Ten, that you mean Ohio State, everyone else. Navy Thomas, that would be Nebraska. About time for Urban to have another mental breakdown. Iowa is one of the most, and the screen took off on me. Where did that comment go? All right, what else do we have here? About time for Urban to have the other mental breakdown. Iowa is one of the most entertaining teams in the country. Big Poppy JT. Well, Nathan Stanley certainly showed us something last year. They're in good hands at quarterback right now. Cowherd hates Iowa's schedule. Cowherd is a homer. They are embarrassing except for the win against the top 5 Ohio State team. Iowa's schedule is for sissies. I like Cowherd. He's my second favorite analyst behind. Thank you very much. Iowa State will be good next year. Yeah, we'll have to look at the Hawkeye, or have to look at the Cyclones this season and get you a preview on them at some point. NCIS Fanatic 21 pulling through for me here. 105 days until the season starts. Al Mitchell is a beast. Miami winning it all. I would be a bit surprised this season. I wouldn't be shocked. A bit surprised with the Canes being able to complete the ascent all the way to the top this year. How is Wisconsin's schedule next year? We'll get there. We'll get there, Jason, in just a second. Or Jesse, I'm sorry. We did Oklahoma for 3 hours at my football practice yesterday. It was 95 degrees, and I live in Florida. We did Oklahoma's. I got you, big Poppy JT. Yes. It's been a long time since I had to go through that. All right, just like Ohio State, Auburn cannot beat Clemson or score against Clemson either. Well, they almost won the game on the Plains against Deshaun Watson when Auburn was a big underdog. And then they did play the defensive struggle last year and were sacked all over the place 11 times. So, yeah, we'll see if Auburn and Clemson ever get back together here soon. Big Poppy with UCF was a Power 5 conference, was in one. Nick Saban, Urban Meyer, Dabo Swinney. That seems to be the consensus in terms of coaches' rankings right now. There would be few that would break that top three. Most people would slot them that way. And so the approach could be one of two here. So we really don't have any dinosaurs out there right now, like a Joe Paterno or Bobby Bowden, where it's difficult to say, or Steve Spurrier, like we did just a couple of years ago in ranking coaches, where it was difficult to differentiate, okay, where do I rank this guy? Because do I rank him based on his ability as a coach right this second, or the track record? Because the track record says Steve Spurrier is, let's say, at least one of the top 2 or 3 coaches in the SEC at the time, versus right now, if I was selecting a coach to coach my team and lead my program, would I take Steve Spurrier number 2 or 3? Well, I wouldn't have just a couple of years ago. So that differentiation I make when I rank the coaches to say, these are the best coaches right now. I'm not looking at track record. Of course, you have to look at the track record to gain a true judgment on how good they are, but I'm not looking at distant track record, and I'm rating the coaches based on who I believe is the best and rating them based on ability to coach a football program right now. Excited to see Nebraska play Colorado this year and then Oklahoma in 20 and 21. Yes, we'll get to that in just a second. Big countdown for the season on Instagram. They have been counting down since the day after the Alabama-Georgia game. Dondre says Iowa beat Michigan, Ohio State, and almost beat Penn State. If you want to look at the last 2 years, yes, they did beat Michigan and Ohio State at home and had the really good effort against Penn State. Let's keep in mind that all those games for Iowa were at home. This year they go to Happy Valley. There are a lot of coaches I'd take over Steve Spurrier. Okay, again, I'm talking about looking back at the last time I did rankings in the SEC and making an example out of Steve Spurrier's career, his track record being highly elevated compared to what I would have rated him his last season or two when he wasn't nearly the football coach that he was then. Yes, I understand, A.B. Thomas. We're doing current coaches. I was just making an example there of how I approach it, looking at the current ability of the coach to lead a program and coach a game versus looking at track record. All right, let's continue through this. And maybe the best way to keep you guys around is to go to Illinois. All right. In 2018, Illinois plays Kent State, Western Illinois, and South Florida, who downed the Illini at home last year in Florida 33-9. That score comes to mind. 2019, we've got Akron, UConn, and Eastern Michigan for Illinois. The Illini take on UConn and Bowling Green in 2020. There's not a whole lot here. 2021, Texas San Antonio at Virginia, a game that has been played a couple times in the postseason. One time with Jeff George at quarterback for the Illini, playing Virginia around 1990. And then they also played in the late 90s in the Micron PC Bowl, and Illinois wiped them out. They put up like 64 points. And they also play Charlotte in 2021. In 22, Illinois got Virginia, Western Kentucky, and Central Michigan. They've got a home and home with Kansas in 2023 and 24. That goes to show you how much confidence the administration and the athletic program and football program have in their ability to raise the standards at Illinois. They have scheduled Kansas for 2023 and 24 home and away. 2025 at Duke. In 26, Duke. In 26, 7, 8, and 9, Illinois will play a series against Missouri. Basketball fans, you know that that's a big-time rivalry that goes back decades on the hard court, with Missouri taking on Illinois, and they are moving that to the football field for 4 consecutive seasons, 2026 through 2029, the SEC and the Big Ten with Mizzou and Illinois. All right, PJ Fleck and his boys in 2018. Of course, the Gophers in recent years have taken on TCU. They lost big on the road a couple years ago, the year TCU broke loose and almost made the national championship or the playoff in its first year in 2014. And then the return trip against Trevon Boykin and company, Minnesota played well within a score, 23-17. And of course, they downed Oregon State in a big way, 48-14, but despite the Gophers only winning 4 games last year. All right, 2018. Out of conference, there's nothing here. So the Big Ten and Jim Delaney have mandated that these schools schedule Power 5 games, but the leftover schedule, nothing can be done about unless they're going to drop opponents. So you will see the lower tier of the Big Ten with schedules lacking Power 5 opponents. Such is the case the next few years for Minnesota. 2018, New Mexico State, Fresno State, Miami of Ohio. 2019, South Dakota State, Fresno, and Georgia Southern. In 2020, Minnesota takes on Florida Atlantic, Tennessee Tech, and BYU. 2021, it's Miami of Ohio, Colorado, good game for Minnesota there, and Bowling Green. In 2022, it's New Mexico State. It is Colorado as well. So they've got to schedule one other game in 2022. In 2023, you got Minnesota taking on Eastern Michigan and going to North Carolina. They've got North Carolina in 2024. They've got Bowling Green and a trip to Provo to take on BYU in 2025. And I like this series. It's an odd one, but it's kind of cool. 2026-27, Mississippi State, Minnesota, home and home. All right, back to the chat. Oklahoma fans are stupid. Not surprising coming from 19 Savage. Illinois couldn't score versus Clemson after the Hall of Fame Bowl. Yes, at the Hall of Fame Bowl, I believe that final score was 30-0. All the Oklahoma fans on that channel didn't seem to be too like that I picked Texas to upset Oklahoma in the comments section. I'm getting into discussions between you guys. I'll let you guys just go and have a free-for-all. Minnesota also with no national championships, or a lot of national championships. Yes, they do. If you want to go back to, I believe the final one, the most recent, was in 1960. So the Minnesota Gophers in the 30s and 40s, dominant. And in 1960, they won the national championship. They were pretty horrendous throughout the 60s, 70s, and most of the 80s. Luke Holtz pumped some life into the program. They had one particular game at the Metrodome against Ohio State that he had Rose Bowl decals printed or sewn into the jerseys for his football team to try to pull off the upset against an Ohio State team that had been to the Rose Bowl the previous season, almost pulled off the win, but did not. And they were better for about 10 years. They were back down before Glenn Mason hit the scene, and they've been pretty much the same program ever since. Glenn Mason set a standard at Minnesota for going 8-3, 7-4 most seasons, and now they've added the 12th game, and Minnesota has roughly gone 8-4 most of those seasons since. We winning the Big 12 this year, Texas, maybe. Texas should never be down. I think Texas is a dark horse for the playoff this year. I would agree. And we've talked about that. All right, more Big Ten scheduling. Let's get our divisions in order. Let's stay in the West. Northwestern and Duke, they have basically joined conferences, either Duke to the Big Ten or Northwestern to the ACC, because they're just playing on a regular basis. Northwestern is playing Duke more than they play anybody in the Big Ten East. They've played Duke 3 or 4 consecutive years. They played Notre Dame recently and Stanford. Those are good series as well. But Duke, 3 consecutive seasons, and they played Duke in 2018, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. Duke Northwestern. It's a rivalry that's under the radar. So for the Wildcats in 18, in addition to Duke, I love this, Notre Dame and Akron. So for the next few years, Northwestern, who typically doesn't schedule that difficult, a lot of Notre Dame and a lot of doubling up of Power 5 opponents several times here. In 18, Duke, Notre Dame, Akron. In 19, at Stanford, UNLV, and UMass. In 2020, Central Michigan. That's the only team on the slate in 2 years for Northwestern. So they've got some work to do to fill out the schedule with 2 other games. In 2021, they've got a game at Duke and they've got Ohio. In 2022, they've got not so rough with Duke, Miami of Ohio, and Southern Illinois. In 2023, at Duke. In 2024, Duke, Rice, and Miami of Ohio. Maybe I touted their schedule a little bit too much. I got excited with that Notre Dame Duke season coming up this year. But they do have Rice in 2025, and they've got Colorado, does Northwestern, back-to-back years in 2026 and 27. Don't remember those schools ever getting together, Northwestern and Colorado. So with a lot of Duke, Notre Dame, and Stanford in recent years, and most notably the Blue Devils, they get Duke all over the board through 2025. And then the game against Notre Dame coming up this year highlights Northwestern. Texas plays Ohio State in like 5 years. Yeah, we will get to that in just a second. We play Texas in 2022 and 23. Yep. That's obviously a series that has been played 3 times since 2005 as well. Purdue's done a nice job here. I love the scheduling for the Boilers. This year, they've got the 2 Power 5 games against Missouri and Boston College. Of course, the Boilers ripped Mizzou on the road 35-3 last year. They also have Eastern Michigan coming up this fall. In 2019, Purdue's got a game at Nevada on the road, but also the 2 Power 5s again for Purdue, Vandy and TCU. Love it. In 2020, Purdue's got Air Force, BC, and Memphis. In 2021, Oregon State and Notre Dame. I love when Purdue used to play Notre Dame all the time. Notre Dame should be in the Big Ten. It was great when Notre Dame played Michigan, Michigan State, and Purdue every year, along with, of course, USC, Stanford, and the rest. 2022 for Purdue, they've got Indiana State. They've got a date at Virginia Tech, Lane Stadium, 2023. Like that one, they got blown out by the Hokies just a few years back. 2024, Notre Dame, Oregon State on the road, and Indiana State. Purdue's got home and home with Notre Dame in 2025 and 27. They've got Notre Dame in 26, along with Wake and Indiana State, Wake and Notre Dame in 2028, and games against Vandy on the road and TCU on the road in 2029 and 2030. Look at Purdue stepping up here with Boston College a number of times, TCU a number of times, Notre Dame all over the place in 2021, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28. Vandy a number of times, Wake a number of times. Schedules all over the place for Purdue with 2 quality Power 5 opponents. Take note, people. That's great. Purdue, good for you. All right. Who else do we have in the Big Ten West? Who am I missing? We've got, Wisconsin, of course. All right. Unfortunately, last season, we did not get a chance to see Wisconsin play a meaningful non-conference game. BYU is typically good, not great. typically winning 8 games. They were awful last year, and Wisconsin wiped them out on the road. And that's unfortunate again because the Badgers, the previous 3 seasons, played 2 games against LSU and a game against Alabama to start the season. But last year and this year, nothing out of the Badgers, and this is going to be the case for the next couple seasons. There's a real hole in Wisconsin's schedule that they should have addressed. 2018, this fall, Wisconsin's got Western Kentucky, New Mexico, and BYU. Awful. 2019, they've got a date against South Florida. That's somewhat entertaining if the Bulls are going to continue to be a top quality group of 5, but I still want to see the Power 5 elite team on Wisconsin's schedule, and they don't have it here. 2019 at South Florida, Central Michigan, and Kent State. 2020 for the Badgers, Notre Dame at Lambeau Field. Okay, love it. Notre Dame, Wisconsin at Lambeau. And just to make it even that much better, the next season, Notre Dame, Wisconsin at Soldier Field. All right, 2020, in addition to Notre Dame, Wisconsin has Southern Illinois and App State. In 2021, they've got Notre Dame, the game at Soldier Field, also Army and Eastern Michigan. In 2022, the Badgers play Washington State, Illinois State, and Hawaii. The game against Washington State, decent. 2023, Buffalo and at Washington State. Then they've got Hawaii on the road. Not a bad little trip right there for Wisconsin in 2024. And they've got Virginia Tech coming onto the schedule in 24 and 25, home and home. They also have North Texas in 25. Here's a good-looking series, home and home. Wisconsin, UCLA, 2029 and 30. If you recall, those two teams got together in 2 Rose Bowls in the 1990s with, of course, Barry Alvarez breaking through after Wisconsin had been horrendous for about 3 decades, winning the 94 Rose Bowl against UCLA, tying for the Big Ten championship and surprising all sorts of folks in doing so at 10-1-1. And then 5 years later, they beat UCLA in another Rose Bowl in Cade McNown. And UCLA and Wisconsin also got together in the Sun Bowl. That was about 5 years later, around 2003, 2004. And Wisconsin, I believe, won that game 21-20. So there's the Badgers. Notre Dame doesn't want to join the Big Ten because they are too scared we're going to lay another smackdown on them like we did in 95, 96, 2006, and 16. Oklahoma too scared to play Alabama or Clemson. We need this rivalry back. Texas and Texas A&M. We do. We've talked about that in looking at the SEC. That's because Clemson crushed Oklahoma 40-6 and 37-17 in back-to-back years. Yes, the Russell Athletic Bowl, and then it was interesting that that was a precursor to what we saw in the national playoff the next year at the Orange Bowl. No conference will take Texas now, according to Navy Thomas. All right, Nebraska. Listen up, Navy Thomas. Nebraska. Let's see, in recent years, it's been Oregon the last 2 years, home and home. Who else have the Huskers played in recent years? A lot of Miami. They played a home and home against the Canes, winning at home by 10. Going to South Florida, getting drubbed in the first half, coming back to almost pull off a win, but losing late 36-33. All right, Nebraska in 2018, this fall, they've got Colorado, Troy, and Akron. And, of course, Colorado, the infamous opponent, which sent Nebraska to the national championship game in 2001 with a 62-36 butt kicking on Thanksgiving weekend. And that really turned into a rivalry that displaced Nebraska-Oklahoma on Thanksgiving weekend. It used to be Nebraska-Oklahoma was the huge one that we all grew up with throughout the 70s and 80s. And then that was displaced with Nebraska-Colorado. And now it's Nebraska-Iowa is that rivalry game. Is that a rivalry? Nebraska-Iowa, I consider it a a minor one. It's still developing, but I think it has potential. There is history there going way back. It's not Nebraska, Oklahoma. It's not even Nebraska, Colorado at this stage. It would be nice to see those two teams play for a Western Division championship one of these years. That might put a little spark into that rivalry, but both teams have not been on top of their game in any given year. So Iowa had the big season in 2015, but Nebraska was decent. They were okay, and Nebraska's generally been a little bit better up until a couple years ago. And this past season, obviously, neither team was great. Nebraska was really down. Iowa was decent and thrashed the Huskers, and have been the better team in the series since Nebraska joined the Big Ten overall. All right, that's 2018. Akron, Colorado, Troy. In 2019 for the Huskers and Scott Frost, they've got South Alabama at Colorado and Northern Illinois. They are not shying away from Northern Illinois, who almost pulled off the upset last season. 2020, South Dakota State, Central Michigan, and Cincinnati. I can't get behind that schedule. Nebraska playing South Dakota State, Central Michigan, and Cincinnati. You have to plan better than that. You have to schedule somebody. You're Nebraska. And 3 years out, you're really expecting to be Nebraska. 2021, the Huskers take on Northern Illinois, Buffalo, and there it is, Oklahoma. The last time they played would have been that 2009 Big 12 championship game in which the Huskers either needed a different timekeeper or they needed the game to go 59 minutes and 59 seconds. Regardless, they played a masterful defensive game with Ndamukong Suh leading the way against Colt McCoy and company, leading 12-10 late. McCoy throws it out of bounds. Still a second on the clock. We all know it well. And the Huskers lost the Big 12 championship. Have not won a conference championship since 1999. But they have their big national game against Oklahoma. That just brings back memories for all of us of the likes of Billy Sims and Marcus Dupree and Keith Jackson and the like, not just in the booth announcing the games. Keith Jackson, tight end on the field. Brian Bosworth and company taking on Nebraska. Big Eight nemesis, one of the great rivalries in college football. Wow. And they get together in 2021. In 2022, it's Oklahoma again, this time in Lincoln. It's Georgia Southern and North Dakota. In 2023, at Colorado. So this is a game that Nebraska wants to get in as a regional rivalry. And Northern Illinois. Again, a lot of NIU for the Huskers. 2024 must be South Dakota State and Colorado. In 25, a game against Cincinnati. So that's the only game on the schedule in 2025. So the Huskers have a game to add in 23 and 24. They have 2 games to add in 25. In 2026, nice little matchup against Tennessee in 26 and 27 for the Huskers home and home. They've got North Dakota State again. So North Dakota State shows up here quite a bit against Nebraska. And there was somebody else in the Big Ten that we found them on their schedule quite a bit. It might have been Iowa or Illinois. All right, here's another home and home series for the Huskers. They've got Arizona in 2028 and 2031. And they've got another 2-game series against Oklahoma. So they just didn't sign the typical home and home with the Sooners, but they've got the 4 games home and home with the Sooners in 2021 and 22, and then also in 2029 and 30. Love it. NCIS Fanatic 21, I think you mean North Dakota State. Yes, North Dakota State. South Dakota State also produced NFL talent, and they have knocked off a lot of Big Ten teams. Well, maybe not a lot. They have taken out Kansas State. They beat Iowa one particular time in Minnesota. I'm going to guess that North Dakota State has beaten the Big Ten 3 times in the last 15 years. What conference do you think Texas will join in 2023? Wow, let me think that one over. I don't know that they have a whole lot of options at this point. There was talk about the Big Ten uh, several years ago during all the upheaval, but Texas would most likely join the Pac 12. I think that they would rather join the Big Ten or the SEC, but the Pac 12 would be possibly a better fit with Colorado in the mix. NCIS Fanatic 21. We already play Michigan on Thanksgiving weekend. USC, UCLA, and Oklahoma, Nebraska need to play on Thanksgiving weekend again, too. Those were the days, weren't they? All right. Let's move now to the Big Ten Eastern Division. NCIS Fanatic 21. Listen up. Here come the Buckeyes. In 2018, TCU, of course, the marquee game in Arlington at Jerry's World. Also, Oregon State is a second Power 5 game. And then Tulane. In 2019, this is awful, 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 awful. How did this happen? How did it get by Gene Smith and the Ohio State Brass? They have to play a national game every year. They should be playing two. They should be playing an Oklahoma type, and then they should play a Missouri type, a Boston College type as the second Power 5 game. In 2019, Ohio State's got Florida Atlantic, Cincinnati, and Miami of Ohio. So unless the Big Ten is lights out, really good, and the Buckeyes win it, and so people don't point to the non-conference slate, the Big Ten is going to have to be rock solid, extremely tough in the top tier for Ohio State to excuse that schedule. Hopefully for them, they've got a strong out-of-division schedule in the Big Ten Western Division that year, because Florida Atlantic, Cincinnati, and Miami of Ohio doesn't get it. All right, in 2020, the Buckeyes play at Oregon. Of course, those two programs got together in the 2010 Rose Bowl with the Buckeyes winning 26-17 as an underdog. And then people didn't learn, the odds makers and the pundits. 5 years later at the national championship game in 2014, the 2014 national championship played in January of 15, and the Buckeyes dominated that game in the second half, especially 42-20. Ohio State also with Bowling Green in 2020. And if you want to go way back, Ohio State, Oregon played a couple games in the 80s, and the Buckeyes won both of those, 24-14 and 31-6 with Earl Bruce on the sideline. 2021 games against Oregon and Tulsa. So one more to schedule for Ohio State. And again, I would look toward the mid to upper tier of a Power 5 conference to try to find somebody. And I believe they're, based on us looking through the SEC future schedules the other day, that there are a number of teams available, Gene Smith, to schedule in 2021 in the SEC. Plenty of schools to get you your third game, a credible opponent in 2021. All right, not so much in 22 and 23. No question, no doubt, Ohio State looks good in the scheduling. A+ here. Notre Dame, Texas, back-to-back in 22 and 23. And of course, against the Irish, the Buckeyes had not faced Notre Dame from 1935 until 95. And the 35 game was a classic, two powerhouses. And then in 95 and 96, the Buckeyes took them out against Ron Paulus and company, both in Columbus, 45-27, with Eddie George running wild, and the next year in 96. And then, of course, they've met in two Fiesta Bowls in the past decade, with Ohio State way too fast, way too quick, and talented Santonio Holmes, Ted Ginn, and Pittman at running back, and Troy Smith at quarterback. The year before he won the Heisman, they beat Notre Dame in the Fiesta. Then they beat him a couple years ago, 44-28. All right, again, the Buckeyes, Texas and Notre Dame, back-to-back years. And, of course, Ohio State and Texas have gotten together 3 times in the past decade, with the Buckeyes winning at Texas to launch the season that they went consensus #1 before they lost the national title to Florida. and they lost the year before the season. Vince Young led the national championship run against USC, and Ohio State and Texas also played an entertaining Fiesta Bowl at the conclusion of the 08 season, in which Beanie Wells had a big first half, missed the second half. Colt McCoy won it late with about 10 or 15 seconds left in the game over the Buckeyes. All right, 2024, Ohio State plays at Washington. These two teams have a pretty lengthy series going back to the mid-'80s as well. Ohio State had a great team in '86, but off to a slow start, and they got pummeled in Seattle 40-7. They won a game against Washington in '93. Two really good top 25 teams playing there. They lost in '94 in Seattle, but then they came back in '95 and beat the Huskies. They also beat them in '03 in Columbus, and they went out to Seattle, did the Buckeyes in '07, and beat a decent Washington team. All right, time to look at Michigan. Dennis, how you doing? We are running through future schedules in the Big Ten. So when we get done, if you want to check out our look at the Big Ten Western Division and me pointing a stern finger at one particular program that is an embarrassment when it comes to scheduling out of conference, then you're going to have to look back at those. But it will post just a few minutes after the live stream is done here. 19 Savage, could we still make the playoffs in the Pac-12? Well, the Pac-12 and the Big 12 certainly have had a credibility issue with the College Football Playoff Selection Committee since 2014. Those are the conferences that have been snubbed multiple times. You could consider Ohio State slightly snubbed, but they did lose 2 games. So those are the conferences that have had one-loss teams that have had to sit out, or 2-loss teams that have been comparable to the teams that were allowed to play. So yes, Texas is Texas. They can go to the Pac-12 and make the playoff. If the Pac-12 continues to stumble, yes, it makes their road more difficult in regards to perception. It makes their road easier in terms of quality of opponents to play and beat on the field. Michigan. Interesting to see what the Wolverines have here in the next 10 years or so. 2018 at Notre Dame, Western Michigan, and SMU. So the huge game for Jim Harbaugh to get 2018 started right and get the bad taste of 2017 out of his mouth, where they couldn't beat any good teams outside of what turned out to be a decent Purdue team. They got to go to South Bend in week 1 with Shea Patterson at quarterback. 2019, Notre Dame at home, Army, and Middle Tennessee. 2020 at Washington, Ball State, and Arkansas State. So again, like Ohio State, I would like to see, if you've heard my scheduling synopsis and my breakdown of non-conference scheduling, and I'm going to shoot the videos so that it's right in one dissertation. I will produce that soon, where I give you my formula for non-conference scheduling in college football. I would like to see everybody play 2 Power 5s, and I will make it work and let you know how. So this one Power 5 opponent, even if it is an exceptional elite program, is not enough for me. And this is what Michigan's doing. 2020 at Washington, Ball State, and Arkansas State. In 2021, they only have the 1 game against Washington, so Michigan still has 2 slots open. In 22 and 23, Michigan takes on UCLA. Of course, those being Pac-12 and Big Ten powers, they have a history at the Rose Bowl. Most recently, Michigan and UCLA played in the '83 Rose Bowl, UCLA winning that game. They played the year before at remember this one, the Blue Bonnet Bowl. Michigan won that game big. 2024 and 27, Texas, Michigan. Good stuff there. Of course, they hooked up in the 2005 Rose Bowl, the highest scoring Rose Bowl in quite some time, that Vince Young took care of late in giving us a precursor to his heroics the next season in the national championship game in the same stadium against USC. Texas, Michigan, 2024 and 27. In 25 and 26, Michigan, Oklahoma. I'll give you guys a second to give me a distinction of why it's important. Not important, but what is the dynamic going back 40 years of Michigan and Oklahoma playing? So these are two great powerhouse teams, programs that should play on a fairly regular basis. We should see the likes of Michigan and Oklahoma playing. All right, NCIS Fanatic 21. I think we should add either Kentucky, South Carolina, or Mizzou in 2021 to get a credible SEC opponent. That would be perfect. So the Buckeyes would match that Oregon game with somebody solid in the SEC, not Alabama, LSU, but very good, solid opponent in Kentucky, South Carolina, Mizzou that have the open slots that NCIS Fanatic 21 points out. All right, slightly snubbed. Come on, Mark. Ohio State had no business even being considered for the college football playoffs this past season. All right, Big Poppy. Have you seen my explanation of how the college football playoff selection could have been better approached this past season? You have to check out one of those videos. You go back to anything past the selection from the first day of December to 10 days later, 15 days later. I went nuts for 15 days. You're going to find it somewhere, and I'll try to look it up and even send it to you, Big Poppy, if you haven't seen it, because I clearly explain why Ohio State had the better argument to go to the playoff than Alabama. I know this sounds ludicrous now because Alabama won the national championship. Okay, hear me out. We didn't have that information then. Also, hear me out. I'm not selecting the team that I'm predicting to win the national championship. I went ahead and picked Alabama to beat both Clemson and Georgia. So I knew Alabama was really, 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 really good and arguably the best team in the country. Had nothing to do with that. I'm not trying to select the four best teams because I don't know who the four best teams are. Nobody knows who the four best teams are. We can guess who they are. We need to select the four teams that earned it. Alabama beat than Alabama did this past season because they had the marquee non-conference victory over Oklahoma. They beat Wisconsin as well. They had the marquee wins that Penn State did not, other than Penn State beating Ohio State head-to-head. All right. I'm not going to get into all that. All right. We're possibly interrupted here. Hopefully you guys are still with us. I'm seeing some issue with the internet connection here. You guys let me know if we're still solid here. Looks like we've... All right. I've lost the chat here for some... All right. Hang in there with me. We had our internet connection compromised there, interrupted, but I believe I'm back on and arguing for the Buckeyes to have made the college football playoff in 2017. And I know that that's a difficult argument to make now that Alabama's won the national championship. So you've got the facts and you've got the history and the 2020 hindsight to deal with. I didn't at the time. All right. Michigan State. Sparty in 2018's got Utah State, Arizona State on the road in Central Michigan. So Michigan State, Arizona State, the next 2 years, home and home in 18 and 19. Also, Michigan State in 19 has Tulsa, Western Michigan, and the game I mentioned against Arizona State. In 2020, love this matchup. Michigan State takes on Miami. They also have a date in Provo against BYU, and they've got Toledo. In 2021 for Michigan State, they go to Miami. They've got Western Kentucky and Youngstown State. In 2022 and 23, Boise State, Michigan State with a home and home. And if you recall, at the beginning of the 2012 season, Le'Veon Bell had a big breakout game when he was not extremely well known at that point against Boise State in a Thursday night or Friday night opener at Spartan Stadium in a close win against the Broncos. 2024-25, Michigan State takes on Boston College. Think back to Brian Hoyer versus Matt Ryan at the Russell Athletic Bowl, or whatever they called it at that point. I believe the Champs Sports Bowl post-2007 season, in which BC had risen to number 2 in the country. And they had a fine season at 10-2, lost the ACC championship game in an upset. And they beat Michigan State in a close game with Matt Ryan at quarterback. So Michigan State and BC get back together 2024 and 25. And then, as it should always be played, we shouldn't have to wait until 2026. Michigan State, Notre Dame, home and home. And they've played some of the great games in college football in recent memory. Let's see what's going on the chat. See if I can get my connection back on the chat. For some reason, we're having issues on the chat. Let me see why that would be a problem. It shouldn't be. Okay. In the meantime, we'll get you back. Penn State's schedule in future years. And Penn State, this is embarrassing. I know Pitt is a Power 5, and they're not even a bad Power 5, but it just seems to be a game that's in your lap. You've renewed the rivalry, and then you've called it a day and haven't done anything elsewhere on your schedule to really show us that you're an elite powerhouse. And I need more out of Penn State. And I also need this connection to come back on the chat. So it looks like I'm good to go in talking to you directly here, but I can't pull it up on the other computer right now. It keeps asking me to run diagnostics. Don't want to do that. Cancel. And so I can read from you guys. So let me get back to the chat as soon as I possibly can, but let's look at Penn State's schedule, future schedule. I think we're going to have to restart the computer. So when I'm big time, have the producer, the production assistants, the researcher off to the side, all this gets taken care of around me, and I talk to you full time. But we'll get there. We'll get there. Restart the computer and look at Penn State's schedule. Nittany Lions coming up this season, 2018, after having played Pitt the past 3 seasons, winning 2 games and losing that game that they lost at Pitt, Heinz Field 2 years ago after they got drubbed by Michigan, or right before they got drubbed by Michigan. And here we are less than 2 seasons later in a completely different perception and different status of Penn State football after running the table, winning the Big Ten championship in the Rose Bowl and losing the Rose Bowl, and then coming back next year to go 11-2 and finish in the top 10 again and win another New Year's Day 6 bowl game. Penn State 2018 against App State, Pitt on the road, and Kent State. I got to look up Kent State's schedules. It seems like they're playing everybody in the Big Ten and the SEC especially over the next 10 years. Kent State's probably got the toughest non-conference schedules in the country. All right. In 2019, Penn State has Buffalo. They also have Pitt and Idaho. This is not a Penn State schedule. This is not good enough. We need to see better teams on the schedule. In 2020, Penn State has, Virginia Tech on the road. They also have Nevada, and then they are playing somebody else that I can't distinguish. San Jose State. All right. I really like this Penn State game coming up in 2021 and 22. Auburn's on the schedule. I love that scheduling for Penn State right there against Auburn. 2021 and 22. Remember that those two teams got together in the 1995 Outback Bowl. It was a rainstorm, muddy field. Penn State blew them out 43-14. They got back together in the 02 Capital One Bowl, and Auburn won that game in a slugfest like 13-7, something like that. For some reason, I can't pull up. The Wi-Fi is giving me all sorts of problems on my other computer. Hang with me here. So we've got West Virginia on Penn State's schedule. So if you really know college football history, or you're an old timer like me, you know that Penn State, West Virginia means something. And that game used to be played all the time when they were independents. Eastern independents included Penn State, Pitt, Syracuse, Maryland at the time, West Virginia, those teams, no conference affiliations. Also South Carolina prior to 1991 and joining the SEC. And those teams played all the time. Penn State, Boston College was another one. So Penn State renews rivalries with West Virginia 2023 and 24. They've got Bowling Green in 24 as well. Then they get the return trip, Virginia Tech in Happy Valley in 2025. All right. It looks like we might know. Don't know what's going on here. It's a mystery. A mystery. We'll try that. All right. Moving on to Indiana and future schedules for the Hoosiers. And by the way, if you're stumbling across my channel for the first time, or if you've seen me a number of times but have yet to hit the subscribe button, please do yourself a favor. We bring on the best bloggers, broadcasters, and writers in the industry, 97 of them just in 2017, and we add almost by the day. And yes, you get analysis from myself on the game that we love, college football. We are just about 100 days away from college football. All right. Indiana has coming up, and I finally have the chat back. Indiana 2018, FIU, Virginia, and Ball State. What is it with the Hoosiers and the Cavaliers playing every year? This is more than a 2-game or 4-game set home and home with these two schools, and they're playing more games against each other. 2018, Virginia, FIU, and Ball State for Indiana. In 2019, the Hoosiers go to Ball State. So Big Ten team going to a MAC school. Doesn't happen too often. They also have Eastern Illinois and UConn. Indiana goes to UConn in 2020. They also play Ball State and Western Kentucky. In 2021, it's Idaho, Cincinnati, and Western Kentucky on the road for the Hoosiers. In 22, they play Idaho, Western Kentucky, and Cincinnati. So this, if you're not going to play a good program, if you're not going to play a Power 5, you don't schedule the 3 exact same teams back-to-back years. So imagine being an Indiana football fan. Not only do you see we don't play anyone, but we're playing the same 3 duds that we played last season. Why? This is just horrible scheduling. 2021, Indiana's got Idaho, Cincinnati, Western Kentucky on the road. Then the next year they play Idaho, Western Kentucky, and Cincinnati again. 2023, it's UMass, Louisville. I like that game, Louisville, Indiana. It's a regional game there. Charlotte also on the schedule in 2023. In 2024, it's Louisville on the road, Charlotte, and Florida International. They've got Louisville again in 25 with Indiana State, and the Hoosiers made it their quest to make sure that they scheduled Indiana State again in 2027. Make sure that they locked down the Sycamores for 2027. All right, I'm a bit behind on the chat. Hope you guys haven't said anything that's too crucial to the stream here. Maryland. Of course, they went to Austin last year and embarrassed Tom Herman in his debut, 41-31. But it's going to be tough to deal with Texas again, even though that game's somewhat at home in Landover, Maryland this year. Maryland with Texas at Bowling Green and Temple this year. Temple, another one of those teams of the Eastern variety that I mentioned a few minutes ago, typically would play the likes of Boston College, Penn State, Maryland, Pitt, and those teams years back. Syracuse, of course. 2019, Maryland has Syracuse at Temple and Howard. In 2020, the Terps take on Towson, Northern Illinois, and West Virginia. So that's a game that's typically been played as part of that Eastern standard, that Eastern feel, that Eastern tradition of independent football years gone by. Maryland at West Virginia. They also play the Mountaineers in 2021. They play Charlotte in 22. So they've got 2 games to schedule in 2021 and 22. Do the Terps. In 2023, they've got Charlotte, Virginia, and Towson. In 24, they've got Virginia and Bowling Green. In 2026, it's Maryland taking on Virginia Tech. So that's a game that they play 3 times. Maryland, Virginia Tech, an old ACC rivalry there, 2026, 27, 28, and 29, actually 4 games home and home with Virginia Tech. And also Maryland made sure that they locked down Youngstown State for 2027. Didn't want to make sure that they, the Penguins, filled up their schedule and weren't able to play Maryland. That was important to get that in. Did I get to everyone? I believe I did. All right. You guys are going back and forth here. I remember they screwed us in the championship game against Ohio State 2002 and 03. I think about the pass interference call. All right. We've talked pass interference in the 03 Fiesta Bowl so many times on this show. We're not necessarily going to go there this time around. You know what? We will go there. So it was holding and not pass interference. Watch the play, and you will see a hold, a clear hold past the 5-yard limit, a hold of Chris Gamble. But when the ball was in the air, it was a fair play. It should have been called holding. The net result would have been roughly the same, a first down for Ohio State, well inside the 5-yard line. No, it was not pass interference, but it was a hold earlier. Jersey, grabbed, held, holding call on the defensive back. Can't think of the kid's name. And Ohio State would have been in basically the same situation. Ohio State fans, if you want a little ammunition against Miami on this one, you got to go back and watch the game, maybe not even catch the whole game. Go back one series or the final 2 series of regulation before Miami brought the punt back and kicked the game-tying field goal at the end of regulation. The series prior, Ohio State had roughly a 3rd and 5 play, threw one to Chris Gamble on the sideline. Number 1, he was in bounds. Number 2, he was held by the jersey. That wasn't called. Ohio State would have converted with about 2.5 minutes left in the game. May have had it. Well, they would have had the chance, the opportunity to run the clock out. Not that they would have, but they still would have run 4 more plays, taken up time, kicked the ball deeper, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Miami would not necessarily had enough time to tie the game. It was a great championship game. 2 excellent teams. And, of course, Miami with more firepower. But if you stack up the teams and the talent, it wasn't the disparity that it was meant and played out to be at the time. The entire Ohio State defense went to the NFL and played at some point in the league. And the offensive line did, and 3 wide receivers and so forth. Terry Porter, the referee, we hate you. Yes, I know it. That was holding, and besides, Miami should have stopped us later downs. No excuses, Canes fans. So I understand the gripe on both sides. Ohio State fans will claim what I just claimed in regards to the previous series and what could have been called to help Ohio State keep the ball and maintain a 3-point lead to run the clock out. They could also say, well, Miami, if you're that good, you wouldn't have gotten beaten by us 3 consecutive series. So Ohio State had to complete that touchdown drive after the pass interference call. They then scored another touchdown, and then they stopped Miami. Miami fans just simply have to say we shouldn't have been playing more football. We won the game right there. Will Smith, yes, Will Smith, unfortunately, not with us any longer. Big Poppy JT, we dominated the early 2000s. Yeah, 2000, 01, 02, certainly the best program in college football. If you take all 3 years into account, was Miami, but USC was coming at that point, and of course the SEC and a number of teams there. All right, guys, if you've got nothing else you'd like to share on the live stream, I just wanted to take a look at future schedules in the Big Ten. I will do the same with the Big 12 and the Pac 12. If you have missed the conversations concerning the SEC and the ACC, just look them up. They've just been posted here in the last week. ACC future schedules, SEC the same. And we addressed a number of other topics around college football. Coming up soon over the next few weeks, I will address quarterback battles. I will give you the pros and cons of each quarterback in the battle, and I will run down what I would consider to be the odds of naming a starter in that particular quarterback battle. And we've got a number of them heating up across the country and going into August. Also, of course, non-conference scheduling needs to be fixed. I will do that soon right here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. I appreciate you joining the live stream. To all the regulars, couldn't do it without you. You guys keep me inspired and fired up, supported, and ready to go each and every day. So you guys have a great rest of your weekend. And who knows, I may jump on here very shortly if I can pull together more future schedules of either the Pac-12 or the Big 12 that we need to look at here very soon. You guys have a great one. And if you didn't see much of this live stream, of course, it's going to post in just a few minutes. You can go back and catch what you missed. We're working on next week's lineup, and we will give you that information as soon as we get it here on Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football.